We are back live nationwide and all around the world with Ron Seggi today on this very special weekend, the 50th anniversary of the first man on the moon. And I have to tell you something, we have put together what I think is a pretty interesting show. This hour from NBC, the man who spent 50 years covering all kinds of launches from the Cape. His book is called Live from Cape Canaveral. Jay Barbary will be joining us. Astronaut Mike Massimino will be here, and astronaut Winston Scott will be joining us this hour. I've had the pleasure over the years interviewing so many astronauts, and one of them was Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon. We're going to play that interview in a couple of weeks, okay? We have it stacked away in our archives, but we're going to bring it out and play it for you either next week or the week after. But when we return with hour number 2, we're going to resume our tribute to the moon landing on Ron Seggi Today.
Welcome to Tax Talk with Hollywood legend Bob Eubanks.
You know, as part of Hollywood for a long time, I've seen my fair share of celebrities get in trouble with the IRS. Well, there's one name I trust, the Tax Defense Group. They're the most trusted name in tax. So if you owe more than $10,000 to the IRS, you really need to call my friends at the Tax Defense Group. Ignoring the IRS is not the solution. They can garnish your paycheck, levy your bank accounts, seize your home or business. But the Tax Defense Group could put a stop to all of that and tailor a program that would reduce your tax debt to pennies on the dollar. You gotta love that. So don't just take my word for it. Call them. Find out for yourself. They offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee, and they're open 24 hours a day because they know that tax debt doesn't sleep either.
Call now for your free and confidential tax analysis from the most trusted name in tax. Call 800-832-1594. 800-832-1594.
This report is brought to you by Bank of America. Bank of America was recently named Best Bank for College Students by Money Magazine. With so many new and returning students preparing for the start of the school year in the weeks to come, it's critical to have the right bank account for student needs. April Schneider, Bank of America.
It's very important to build a strong financial foundation early in adulthood. At Bank of America, we're committed to helping students start off on the right foot by providing them with best-in-class products like the Advantage Safe Balance banking account, along with educational resources such as Better Money Habits.
Bank of America's Advantage Safe Balance banking account allows students to bank without the worry of overdraft fees while providing them with full mobile access to their account. Eligible students under age 24 also don't pay a monthly maintenance fee. This account was named Best Student Account by Money Magazine and is used by over 1 million clients. For more, visit bankofamerica.com. That's bankofamerica.com.
We're back with Ron Seggi Today, nationwide and around the world, as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the moon landing back in July of 1969. And I am very excited to have our next guest on the show with us. I had the indeed honor of being with him a couple of weeks ago, celebrating his 50 years with NBC as a correspondent, and it was a great dinner. We had a terrific time. And for a guy like myself, who was about 11 years old back in the early 60s, 61, when Alan Shepard went up, and used to get in my brother's winter underwear and climb underneath the steps and pretend I was Alan Shepard, talking to this guy is a real thrill. Joining us right now with a brand new book, live from Cape Canaveral, NBC's Jay Barbary. Hey, Jay, how are you?
Fine, Ron. Thanks so much for having me on, Guy.
Well, thank you. And I got to tell you something. I had a great time at that function. It was sponsored by the Chamber, I think. And,
yes, it was.
And I was sitting next to, the nice part about it was I was not only sitting next to your current group, which is my buddy Dan Beckman and Dan Shepard, but I was next to Herb Gold and Jim Kitchell, who was the former producer and cameraman for you when you first started. So, man, it was a great evening.
Well, Jim Kitchell actually opened the Cape here back in 1957. He talked the Air Force into letting us on. So we got on the first time with the launch of our first satellite, which was Explorer, on January the 31st, 1958. But it was great. Kitch is retired and living out in western Colorado, so we got him to come back and to have him here and have our current group here.
Well, you know, you have seen things and been in this business so long that it is just an honor to be in your company, and you've got such great stories. But you know what I noticed, one thing about you, Jay, and I say this very affectionately, you still have the twinkle in your eye, the excitement. You know, Some people, after 25, 30 years, I've been in the radio and TV business, sometimes you start to, be jaded by the surroundings. You're not.
Of course not. Because I tell you, when you're born on a farm in South Georgia, and the only way you can make money is picking cotton at 1 cent a pound, you work from sun up to sundown and do everything you can to get 100 pounds of cotton so you can make $1 a day. Well, when they give you a great job like I have at NBC and all the great people around, you continue to appreciate it. But I appreciate every launch. Every launch is just as exciting to me today as it was when Alan Shepard went up. And there's been 150 with American astronauts on board.
The amazing part about this, ladies and gentlemen, is 50 years celebration that was celebrated on the anniversary of Sputnik, of course, which was the successful launch of the Russians of a satellite. And you started at that point. You've met them all. I mean, you know them all. They're your pals. I had the honor, as you and I discussed, of getting to be very close friends with Alan Shepard. And I'll never forget when I asked him one day, I said, Alan, did you ever think you would be the first American in space? And he laughed with that, that very, I'm going to say this affectionately, that very arrogant confidence that he had, which I admired. And he said, of course, Ron, I always knew I would be the first in space. And you can just picture him saying that, can't you?
Oh, I sure can. In fact, he was told he would be the first, and the other 6 of the 7 astronauts on January the 19th, 1961, the day before John Kennedy was sworn in as President of the United States. They kept that a secret until finally he was spotted getting in a spacesuit on May the 2nd, first attempt to put him into space, and the weather postponing. And he was spotted by an Associated Press cameraman, and the word got out. Of course, we knew about it ahead of time, but it was given to me off the record, and I couldn't say anything. What they had proposed, they were considering bringing 3 astronauts out, and they were going to bring out John Glenn, Gus Grissom, and Alan Shepard, and then one of them would get on board. And I cornered the director of Mercury program, Robert Gilruth, in the Holiday Inn restaurant, and I said, what are you doing? This is NASA. It is a civilian space agency. Where is your reasoning for secrecy? I said, the American taxpayers are footing the bill. They have a right to know. And he said, well, it's my decision. I said, no, it's not your decision. It's the American people's decision. Now, if you want to work in a secret program, go to the CIA. You don't belong in NASA.
Mm-hmm.
To him, well, he got pretty peeved at me, which is okay with me because I didn't care for what they were doing. I let him know it. And so Alan Shepard didn't care for it. None of them cared for it.
Right.
They wanted it out in the open, and we finally got it out in the open. He and Chris Kraft, who was the first flight director, they were absolutely the worst. They were probably great scientists, but they lived in the Stone Age, when it came to what should be done as far as the public is concerned. When we went over, Jim McKitchell and I went over to Houston when they first opened Houston over there. Chris Kraft sat down and looked at us, Ron, and he says, well, I'm going to give you the signal 5 minutes delayed just in case, and yeah. I went straight up and said, hey, this is a civilian space program. Well, Jim Kitchell said to me, sit down, Jay, it's okay. And I locked horns with that guy right then. I said, what do you think you're doing? This is a civilian space agency. It is not to have anything secret. However, you and I both know they did fly secret missions. They flew secret cameras for the Air Force and all. But again, on the other hand, NASA was chartered by the American Congress as a civilian space agency.
Well, Kit used to tell me about the times that they would actually have helicopters come by a rented house that NBC had just to be able to, get the sand going to the point where you couldn't really see the footage because they didn't want to have the American public see any failures.
That was before NASA existed.
Yeah.
This was the Air Force, and before we could get on the Cape, and as I said, he was one of the guys that got us on the Cape. But they would fly. We would be out on on the sand dunes. Now, I only got here on the tail end of that. Kitch was here before me. He got this open up, but all the guys would set up their cameras on the sand dune just south of the Cape so they could see the launch, and we'd sit there and wait and watch for something to go, because the way you learned in those days what was happening was that you knew people that worked on different rockets, and if they weren't home, they were out there, something was going on. Mm-hmm. Plus, they would put a red ball up at the port, and we could see it for ships coming in and out. So ships could see that red ball. It meant something was going on out there, and they shouldn't be, in the water just beyond the launch pads. And that was our big signal.
You called John Shorty Powers early in the morning when you found out about Yuri Gagarin's flight, and he said, hey, we're sleeping down here,
Right.
and that you're sleeping down here at NASA was interpreted as not we're, still sleeping, but, we're like resting on our laurels, yeah.
Yeah, he gave us a perfect headline. But Shorty, I woke Shorty up, and Shorty was, well asleep, and he slammed the phone up. Of course, he said a few other choice words we can't say on the air before that.
Sure.
And I like Shorty, don't get me wrong, because Shorty took good care of him and everything, but I couldn't help but come back and say, Russians orbit a man, and NASA says they're asleep.
Tell the great story of Gus Grissom and Frank Sinatra.
Well, a lot of people, Gus was he was very disgusted with the Apollo spacecraft because they switched builders from McDonnell to North American. They did not have the people. They had a lot of retired Air Force colonels that didn't know what the heck they were doing. They were just there drawing a paycheck. So the experienced people that they had that were built the Mercury and the Gemini spacecraft in McDonnell and St. Louis, they were cut out of the loop. So we had an awful spacecraft that was the wiring, the bundling of the wiring and all was nothing state-of-the-art. And in a pure oxygen environment, of course, we lost the Apollo 1 crew, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Chaffee. They didn't burn up because they were in their suits. The spacecraft burned up. The suits protected them. It just sucked the oxygen out of their lungs, and they suffocated while they were in there. About 10 days before, they stopped over at Ellis Air Force Base out at Las Vegas. That was a trick that a lot of guys used. If they wanted to go take a show in over at Vegas or something, they would suddenly develop aircraft trouble over the area, and they'd have to land, and have it looked at. Meanwhile, they'd go into town and take in a show.
That's fun.
Well, the Apollo 1 crew went in and to see a show, and Frank Sinatra's show, as a matter of fact, and Gus had on his jacket, his astronaut jacket with patches on it and all that.
Uh-huh.
As soon as he was spotted, Frank had him moved up to a table up front. They brought a table out in front and pushed him around and made room for him and seated him right there. And then Frank went on so much about how he liked Gus's jacket that Gus stood up, took it off, and gave it to Sinatra. So 10 days later, he died in the fire. But when Gus gave him the jacket, Frank Sinatra literally cried on stage holding that jacket. And as I wrote in the book, he cried a lot more 10 days later when he heard about the fire.
Very special guest is Jay Barbary. New book is out right now, live from Cape Canaveral, celebrating 50 years of covering the space program for NBC on this special weekend. And Jay Barbary and myself will be back with more Live with Ron Seggi today.
As a mother, you don't want to have to worry about this bill is coming, but then she needs this chemo. That's a decision you shouldn't have to make.
At St. Jude, a family never sees a bill at all. It's like the world has been lifted off of your shoulders.
The treatment doesn't get any better than what you receive at St. Jude. It saved my life. It saved my daughter's life. It saved our family.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures. Saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
As a mother, you don't want to have to worry about this bill is coming, but then she needs this chemo. That's a decision you shouldn't have to make.
It's a huge burden lifted financially, and so it allows you to give singular focus to your child. I've never known a hospital that takes care of their patients so thoroughly.
That was the first thing I was like, how are we going to do this? When they told us that we didn't have to pay a single bill, I was like, wow. They pretty much have saved us.
It's like the world has been lifted off of your shoulders, and now your focus is supporting this child.
There is not another hospital like St. Jude. The patient care is unmatchable. It saved my life. It saved my daughter's life. It saved our family.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures. Saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
It's pretty amazing when you consider that 7 years ago, we didn't have the treatments we have now. We cure 80% of children with cancer. Go back 50 years, we were curing 20 to 30%. This is the miracle story of modern medicine. We understand what makes this cancer tick. And of course, without donors from around the world, this just couldn't happen. There's one thing we're focused on, and that's beating this thing.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures. Saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
It is a horrible scenario, but it happens. Dennis writes about his wife. She was diagnosed with leukemia. In fact, she's a 2-time survivor. And in the midst of all that, they ran up over $1 million in medical bills. Thankfully, they're Medi-Share members. And Dennis says they are so thankful for that, how others came together to meet their needs. And that's how so many Medi-Share members feel. This is not health insurance. It's different. You don't have to pay for things you don't believe in. And like Dennis found out, it just works. So if you join Medi-Share, not only do you save a lot of money, the typical family saves about $500 a month, but you know where your money's going each month. You're helping people. And if the time should come, they'll be helping and even praying for you. So yes, it's different. And as more than 400,000 people now know when it comes to healthcare costs, different is beautiful. Find out more. Call 833-34-BIBLE. That's 833-34-BIBLE. 833-34-BIBLE.
Back again all across the USA with my friend Jay Barberie. Live from Cape Canaveral is the name of the book. It's out right now. It is fantastic. And Jay has been with NBC, count it, 50 years. That's more than Ed Sullivan, Johnny Carson. You passed them all by, Jay.
Well, I tell you, I think I did it continuously. And the thing is, like, for example, our friend Willard Scott, he was around for 50 years, but it was a 50 accumulated years, I think. He went in there and took off one time. He started out as a page, and he took off one time to be the clown. What was the clown's name?
I think it was either Ronald McDonald or...
Yeah, with Ronald McDonald, he was that clown, I think, Ronald McDonald for a while, and then he came back. But anyway, I've been very fortunate in the fact that I've never been sick while we had a mission underway with astronauts. I've covered all of 150 missions. And to correct the record here now, Ron, I'm in my 50th year with NBC. I will have completed my 50th year on July 21st.
Wow.
So I've completed 49. I'm in. We were celebrating the other night at the dinner you were speaking about. We were celebrating 50 years of space flight, starting with Sputnik 50 years ago. So the book, yes, I'm in my 50th year with NBC. Hadn't quite completed 50 yet.
But you got to go, when you get this book, to the last page, 307. Read it. It will bring tears to your eyes, I guarantee you. Now, here's something that I'm very amazed at. We were having a discussion, in fact, last night with our staff, and they said, what are you going to talk to Jay about? And I said, I really don't think that's going to be a problem because I've been in Jay's company before. I think he can carry it pretty good, But they said, why don't you ask him what was the most memorable moment, as you've probably been asked a million times, during this 50-year career covering the space program? And when asked what the biggest achievement of the space program was exactly what we talked about at this discussion and had nothing to do with landing on the moon, first man in space. It was something totally different that dealt with world peace.
It sure did. You want me to reveal it?
Please.
Okay. I'm going to ask you, about what was the most important thing. I can think of nothing more important than SDI, commonly called Star Wars, a Strategic Defense Initiative. Nothing has been more important to the human race than that project. Now, here's what I mean by that. On July 15th, 1975, when we launched our Apollo to dock with the Soyuz that was launched from Russia, there were over 200,000 warheads on missiles of all sorts pointing at one another. That not only the missiles that are underground or in silos, rather, or on launch pads or in submarines, the ones slung under the wings of aircraft and on other armored vehicles and shoulder-launched missiles. President Richard Nixon had set up détente. He'd been talking to him. Good friend of mine I wrote 3 books with, Martin Caden. I dedicated this book to Marty. He was the greatest aviation and space writer I ever knew. And Marty had written a book called Marooned. And the astronaut was marooned in space. He was originally on a Mercury. Frank Capra did the movie, and he, made it an Apollo at the time. It starred Gregory Peck. And a cosmonaut saved the astronaut at the end of the movie. Most people have seen that. Well, in détente, President Nixon was talking to the Soviet leaders and told them we needed a common docking adapter so that we could go up and rescue one another. And they agreed, and we had that flight. Well, that was the start of the fall of the Cold War. Now, we continue to cooperate. Today, we're the two most powerful nations in the world in space, plus the fact that we are partners, the two main partners on board the International Space Station. Don't get me wrong, the Europeans, the Canadians, the Japanese and all are just as important. But Russia and America puts more of the dollars and the flights up there. We're using the spacecraft to get up there. When they started to build SDI, can you think, any reasonable, sane person, can you think of anything that would be more advantageous to us as a nation to have a shield that would protect us from incoming nuclear warheads from rogue nations, who all of them, like North Korea, Iran, all of them are trying to develop these vehicles. We're not that concerned with large nations because they have too much at stake. But these who like to make trouble, that don't have that much at stake, what could we have better than a shield to protect ourselves? Now, it can be done, but we had a lot of people in academia saying it couldn't be done. But the Russians knew that it could be done. And Michael Griffin, who is NASA administrator now, was the deputy director of that program. You ask him that question, and the first words that comes out of his mouth, SDI. Mm-hmm. You asked Dr. Gene McCall, the chief scientist of the Air Force, a good friend of mine. Yes. He'll tell you the same thing. Because what happened was, it's sort of like two neighbors live by one another, and they keep trying to outdo one another. The Joneses keeping up with the Joneses, and they keep spending. You put in a swimming pool, I put in a swimming pool. You put in a tennis court, I put in a tennis court. And pretty soon you get to the point that one neighbor starts running out of money. Well, the Soviet Union started running out of rubles. The Soviet Union could not financially, after we got to that point, compete with us to build SDI. Even though President Bush, President Reagan, and President Bush that followed and all said, we will simply give you the technology. We want you to be safe, too. We don't want you to feel like it's a threat. So this is what started the friendship that disarmed and reduced the nuclear warheads on this planet to a manageable level. The Russians knew we had the technology. The Russians knew that we had the brain power to do this. They knew that we would get it done in a couple of 3 years. And they had a choice of either matching us ruble per dollar or becoming our friends. So they have become our friends. The Soviet Union came apart. The Berlin Wall came down. The major factor was SDI, Star Wars. Now, you might ask, okay, what's happened to it? The technology is still there. They've had a couple of successful flights. They keep working on this, but not at the pace that they were going to work on it, because we don't believe right now that we need to work on that pace, but we should. We should continue, because the problems that we're going to have will not be with China or be with Russia. The problems we're going to have are rogue nations, some idiot out there who is going to get a hold of a missile and try to drop it on New York City or in San Francisco Bay. Anyway, I think that when you stop and you analyze all of it, for my sake, of my grandchildren and my children to leave here on this planet, I think they are a heck of a lot safer because of SDI. And that was the most important space project since the beginning of space 50 years ago.
It wasn't an event or a milestone or a major accomplishment that we would have thought of. It was something totally different, Jay. In your opinion, the space race brought safety to world peace. That's amazing. The name of the book is Live from Cape Canaveral with Jay Barbary. Jay, thanks for joining us and being part of today's show.
Thanks so much for having me on, Guy.
Thank you, my friend. And there's more to come live all across the USA and around the world with Ron Seggi today. Live all across the USA and around the world, it's Ron Seggi today. Talking about around the world, our next guest has been just that several times. In fact, he was a NASA astronaut from 96 to 2014, a veteran of 2 space flights to the Hubble Space Telescope, and he's written a new book that is terrific. It's called Spaceman, an astronaut's unlikely journey to unlock the secrets of the universe. He's been with us before. He's a fellow Italian. Joining us right now is my friend Mike Massimino. Hello, Mike. How are you? Thanks for being back with us.
Thanks, Ron. It really is great to talk with you again. Thanks for having me.
Well, before we do anything, I just got to tell you that I am so happy, and I've said this to you before, that a nice Italian boy is in the history books. That is fantastic.
Well, I'm an American, but no, yes, my grandparents all immigrated from Sicily. Yes, you bet.
Okay, I'm the same way, too.
Yep.
Love this book. It's called Spaceman. This is a page-turner. Thank you for writing this, because you know what? Not only is it extremely interesting behind the scenes, but it's a motivational book for young people, because you, at a very young age, back in July of 1969, stood outside and looked at the moon and thought, wow, there are people on that moon. And that's how it all started, didn't it, Mike?
Yeah, it is. And as you say, one of the key words in that title for me is unlikely. It's an unlikely journey. And I dreamt about it as a little boy. I had no idea how that ever was going to happen. And really didn't pursue it until I got older. But it was a dream that was formed as a very small child, an interest that never went away. And I was lucky enough that through not giving up and hard work and a lot of good fortune, I was able to be selected as an astronaut and fly in space a couple times. It was just an extraordinary opportunity.
But I think the motivational part of this, Mike, is this, that when you were rejected twice by NASA, and on the third try you made it, then they found out that you had poor eyesight and that you would never make the cut. And then you got over that obstacle. And you claim that you really weren't the smartest kid in the class, and you got over that obstacle. So perseverance and going after something that you wanted so bad is a great incentive for people that not only our age, but youngsters who are listening and finally find a hero out there, which is very difficult to do in our day and age.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying it, Ron, because I think that's what's resonated with a lot of people is the idea that you can have a dream as a little kid and follow it as best you can, never giving up. And there were times where I thought for sure there was no way this astronaut dream was going to work, and I just stuck with it. And the idea of giving up was really unthinkable for me. Mm-hmm. I think it's hard sometimes to really be honest with yourself and say, this is what I really want to do. Because if you say that to yourself, yeah, this is the thing I really want to do. This is my life stream. This is what's most important to me. And then at the same time you realize, well, it's really unlikely this is going to happen. It's going to be impossible. All of a sudden it becomes really difficult. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to be honest with yourself. If you love something, you really need to pursue it. And when you're told no, when you meet with disappointment, don't give up. Just keep going. No matter how bad it seems, there's always a glimmer of hope at the end.
I think that's great advice and a marvelous thing to say, especially for our youth out there. Now, you also candidly admit that your personality had a lot to do with it, because when people were kind of being stuffed shirts around you, you lightened things up. And you admit that you were kind of naturally clumsy. And when you were up there in zero gravity, you were banging into everything, knocking into people, and actually gained weight in space because you liked eating in space vis-a-vis other astronauts who normally lose weight in space. I mean, you're the perfect guy up there. You know that?
Yeah, I think it's important to try to keep things light and keep things positive as best you can. And sometimes we take our job seriously, and there's definitely an amount of stress associated with flying in space. Part of it is the hazards involved, and also not only that, but that you're trying to do something that is fairly important and complicated, and you don't want to mess it up. You feel very fortunate you got picked to do the job, and you don't want to be the one to destroy the Hubble Space Telescope.
Right.
But if you think too much about that, you're going to drive yourself nuts. So I think it's really important to try to keep things light. And, I am a clumsy guy pretty much on Earth, and I had to do my best to try to make sure I didn't break the telescope. Came close a couple times, but luckily it all worked out that way. And eating in space, I really like the food. It's easy to cook, too. Just how to warm it up.
Well, it's funny because I remember you telling me this, and you included it in the book, that here's a man, ladies and gentlemen, that's been in space 2 times, walked in space, actually set a record, him and his crew, of walking in space, and afraid of heights. Explain that one.
Yeah,
right?
I don't like heights at all. Yeah, I don't like heights, but it doesn't necessarily prevent you from flying in space. It didn't with me. I don't like looking over the side of a building. I don't like being a low railing looking over I don't like that feeling at all. So I just avoid it whenever possible. And there's other astronauts who, I'm not the only one. There are many of us, but there's a couple of us with the same problem. But it's got, I never felt it's being in an airplane. Looking out the window of an airplane, right. You're up pretty high, but you don't necessarily feel like you're going to fall. And that's the way it was in space. I didn't feel like I was going to fall. So the fear of heights is a real thing, but luckily it didn't show itself in space for me.
Well, you had trouble just walking over the gentry there, the walkway, didn't you?
Yeah, that would close my eyes for that one. Hold on to the railing and close my eyes. That was always better. You can always close your eyes. If you don't like what you're seeing, just close your eyes.
Mike, I think I told you this. I had become very good friends with the first American in space, Alan Shepard. He was a great guy. He was a unique individual, to say the least. He was the first person to play golf on the moon. But you were the first to tweet in the Hubble, right? Yeah.
I was the first astronaut to tweet from space, and that was great because it's just another way to. I still tweet, and I'm at Astro_Mike is my Twitter handle. So I still tweet, and it's a great way to share what you're doing, a great way to share information. And I liked it because it was fairly simple to get a tweet out and could share these things that I would see up in space. So I saw something that I thought was interesting, or something that touched me emotionally, and I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. I was like, well, now I can share it with anybody who's interested, and I would tweet that out, and I still try to do that as much as I can.
That's great. Do you know astronaut John McBride, Mike?
Sure, yes. I know him fairly well, yeah.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I had the opportunity.
Yeah,
I've been on a couple of automobile rallies with him, and I was out in California.
Oh, wow.
And I was dying to fly back with him. We arranged it so we were both on the same plane sitting next to one another. So I tell people, I can't tell you this because you obviously know it, but when I want to brag, I just tell people that I flew with John McBride, and they don't know where it was. They could have been, a space shuttle. What is it like? I love your description. What was it like to see the Earth from that perspective? Again, going back to Alan Shepard, he said, I never saw the boundaries. It just looked so frail, that Earth. What was it like to you, Mike?
I think for me, it was it's the most beautiful sight I've ever seen, and I try to in the book. I try to describe what I was feeling when I was looking at it, and my thoughts were at one point just when I could from the spacewalk where I could just enjoy the view of it and kind of get into the moment. The thought was, if you were in heaven, this is what we would see. If you could be up in heaven looking down on our planet, this is what you would see.
Wow.
And then I was just kind of dwelling on that, and it was like, no, that's not right. It's more beautiful than that. This is what heaven must look like.
Wow.
I really felt like I was looking directly into paradise when I had a chance to look at the Earth from space.
Gosh, unbelievable. And you almost teared up a couple times. You didn't want to cause a shock.
I did, yes, I did. Yeah, that could be a problem. Yeah, I had to control myself. I didn't want to get the water in my spacesuit and create all kinds of issues. So, yeah, I had to be careful about that. I had to keep myself, as much as I could, I had to keep myself under control. But then you're able to let loose after the fact.
You once told me, too, that there's really no way of actually feeling, even with all the tests, what it was like to launch in that space shuttle. And it's all in the book. I got to tell you something, Mike. I could talk to you for not hours, days, years. Okay? And when you have more time, I'd love to have you come back and chat about it, okay?
I would love that, Ron. Thank you very much for having me back, and pleasure to speak to you. And anytime, we'd love to speak to you some more. Thanks very much.
That sounds great, Mike. Mike Massimino, the name of his book is entitled Spaceman, an astronaut's unlikely journey to unlock the secrets of the universe. And, of course, as we mentioned in the introduction, Mike served as a NASA astronaut from 1996 to 2014, a veteran of 2 space flights to the Hubble Space Telescope. Mike and his crew set team records for spacewalking time, and he became the first person to tweet from space. He's also played himself on the CBS sitcom The Big Bang Theory, was featured in the IMAX film Hubble 3D, and has appeared frequently in television documentaries, on late-night talk shows, and news programs. Great guy, Mike Massimino. We're going to pause for just a second. We have a lot more to come, live all across the USA and around the world. Want to remind you to check out our website, which is ronseggi.com, RONSEGGI.com. We'll be right back with Ron Seggi Today.
It is a horrible scenario, but it happens. Dennis writes about his wife. She was diagnosed with leukemia. In fact, she's a 2-time survivor. And in the midst of all that, they ran up over $1 million in medical bills. Thankfully, they're MediShare members. And Dennis says they are so thankful for that, how others came together to meet their needs. And that's how so many MediShare members feel. This is not health insurance. It's different. You don't have to pay for things you don't believe in. And like Dennis found out, it just works. So if you join MediShare, not only do you save a lot of money, the typical family saves about $500 a month, but you know where your money's going each month. You're helping people. And if the time should come, they'll be helping and even praying for you. So yes, it's different. And as more than 400,000 people now know, when it comes to healthcare costs, different is beautiful. Find out more. Call 833-34 BIBLE. That's 833-34-BIBLE. 833-34-BIBLE.
We are back, and we're live all across the USA and around the world. This is one of the classiest guys you'll ever meet. And believe me, when I say that we go around the world, don't go around the world quite like astronaut Winston Scott. That's even a cool name. Retired captain of the United States Navy, former astronaut. He was on the STS Endeavour, the 72, the STS 87. Winston, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing fine, Ron. It's good to hear your voice again.
Well, thank you so much for showing us a good time when you were out at that function in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago. How many hours did you log, and how many miles did you log in both of those missions? Because it had to be astronomical.
Yeah, I was in space. Total time in space was about 24 days. Let's say I had 9 days on Endeavour and 16 days on Columbia, so close to 25 days and 3 spacewalks. It was 19 hours and some minutes outside spacewalking.
Wow.
And I don't recall exactly how many millions of miles I logged. I probably should remember that, but without looking at the stats, I don't, because it's millions of miles. And, I tease my audiences sometimes. I say if you buy a car with several thousand miles on it, it's a slightly used car. Well, I've got several million miles. Does that make me a slightly used astronaut?
Yeah, I'd hate to look that up on Carfax, because that would be really... And you have a book, Reflections from Earth Orbit.
Yes.
I got to get that.
Oh, I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
The feedback I've gotten has been so tremendous. I'm very pleased that people who have read it have enjoyed it.
Now, we were talking, you and I, a couple of weeks ago, and I asked you about some mutual friends we had, like Mike Massimino.
Yes.
And Mike was telling me, he's a former astronaut, ladies and gentlemen, we had him on our show before, that by the time that shuttle even clears the launch pad, it's going in excess of a couple hundred miles an hour. And I asked you at that time, is there any test on Earth, any procedure that you go through that can duplicate that in some kind of a simulator, that immense speed, because I can't imagine that they could replicate that on land?
No, not really. The closest thing you can come to is replicating the G-forces in a centrifuge. So the centrifuge can give you that sensation, the acceleration, but it's not exactly the same thing as actual launch on the shuttle. It's just an incredibly fast vehicle that continues to accelerate the entire 8.5 minutes it takes to leave the Earth and reach orbit. It's an amazing ride.
Now, were you scared at all?
No, people ask me that all the time, and I can be honest and say, no, I really wasn't afraid. It was very exciting for me.
Really?
Yeah, very much so. I enjoy it.
Now, when you walked in space, you're going like 18,000 miles an hour, and you're just floating up there.
Yes, you, the spaceship, and everything you're working with is traveling at the same speed. So, yeah, somewhere around 18,000 miles per hour.
Do you ever get claustrophobia?
No, if you get claustrophobia in this business, you're in the wrong business, and you don't have much room inside that shuttle. 6 people on a space shuttle mission is like 6 people living in a camper. In a Winnebago. And, of course, you can't get up and go outside and take a walk when you feel like it.
Yeah.
You got to get along with your crewmate.
I was honored to be good friends with Alan Shepard.
Yes.
And that was amazing to listen to him talk, because Alan... Did you know Alan?
No, never got a chance to meet Alan Shepard.
Alan had a little bit of an egotistical edge to him that you admired.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't one of those things like, wow, he's into himself. I mean, I asked him one time, I said, did you ever think that you would be the first American in space? And he looked at me with his steely blues and said, of course. Are you kidding me?
You know what? You have to have that kind of self-confidence to come to this business.
Yes.
And to fly fighters or to fly spaceships or walk in space, if you don't feel that way, if you aren't confident in yourself in that respect, then again, you're in the wrong business.
You're in the wrong business.
Yeah.
Now, what's going to happen here now? We've got some issues with the space station where they may have to evacuate that in November?
Oh, man, we certainly hope that doesn't occur. And,
Yeah.
and of course, many of us are very disturbed by the overall direction in which our space program is going. You know, we shut down the shuttles, and we put all of our eggs in the Russian basket, and now they're having some difficulties with their rockets. I'm confident that Russia will find the problem, and they'll will take care of it, and we'll be able to service the station without having to evacuate. So that's a little bit extreme, and we hope that doesn't occur.
If they evacuated it, how would they get back into it if we're not launching any shuttles? Would it be with the Russians?
Oh, yeah, with the Russians. If they had to evacuate, say the Russians have not fixed their problem yet, so we evacuate at some point after that, weeks, hopefully days, weeks, months, or whatever, the Russians would get the problem fixed and then launch back to the station.
You know, the comments are made, why are they going in space? You know, we got all these problems on Earth. And I think that a lot of people fail to realize how many of the conveniences and technological things that we enjoy on a day-to-day basis, take for granted, really got their start with the fact that it was done in space.
Absolutely. I could go on and on and on for hours and hours and not touch on everything that the average American uses that is a result of our space program. People just don't realize all the cell phones and GPSs that we use and all these iPads and iPods and iPhones and telemedicine. You know, when the paramedics show up to take care of you and to relay your vital signs back to a doctor in the hospital, all that stuff came out of the space program. Freeze-dried coffee, new growing and planting techniques for farmers, the conditioning of the ozone layer, you know, spotting hurricanes thousands of miles away so that we know when to evacuate. That comes from satellites. Well, who put those satellites up there? But our space program. So the list just goes on and on and on about the benefits we get from space. How
long do you think we're going to be out of that business before we're back into it, either with private enterprise or as a government-subsidized program?
I'm optimistic in that private companies will step up and be able to service low Earth orbit, and the funding has to be adequate. If there's not adequate funding, the private companies can't be successful either. If there's adequate funding, I think we'll see our private companies routinely sending cargo to the International Space Station, and then they'll be sending people in orbit. When they do get to Earth orbit, we're still only in Earth orbit. We have no one pushing off into the solar system, going back to the moon, off to Mars, and so on. A good, robust space program needs to have routine flights to the International Space Station, but also pushing out into the solar system. And we don't have that.
No.
And that's what really disturbs many of us.
I think that the loss of the supersonic jet and the loss of this space program has made this country very backward.
I can't help but agree with you there.
We've been talking to Winston Scott, who, of course, is a former astronaut. He is also involved with the Florida Institute of Technology in Melbourne, Florida. I can only ask you one favor at this point, Winston, because I know I'm going to be talking to you and you're going to be, you know, like really annoyed at me and everything. Can you give me one of them blue jumpsuits?
Well, I could tell you where you can get one.
Oh, yeah, can you really?
Absolutely.
Oh,
yeah.
All right, that's all I need.
Yeah, we can work on that.
You look so cool in that blue jumpsuit.
Well, I appreciate it, but I tell you what, I retired from active duty several years ago. I'm just happy that I can still get in that.
Oh, you got into it, okay. Bring your trumpet along. We'll jam a little bit. Okay?
I would enjoy that.
Winston, thank you so much. As I mentioned in the introduction, you're a class guy. You really are.
I appreciate it very much. It's been my pleasure.
Our guest has been Winston Scott, former astronaut on 2 space shuttle missions, a list of credentials from here to outer space. And we'll be back with Ron Seggi today.
As a mother, you don't want to have to worry about this bill is coming, but then she needs this chemo. That's a decision you shouldn't have to make.
At St. Jude, a family never sees a bill at all. It's like the world has been lifted off of your shoulders.
The treatment doesn't get any better than what you receive at St. Jude. It saved my life. It saved my daughter's life. It saved our family.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures. Saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
As a mother, you don't want to have to worry about this bill is coming, but then she needs this chemo. That's a decision you shouldn't have to make.
It's a huge burden lifted financially, and so it allows you to give singular focus to your child. I've never known a hospital that takes care of their patients so thoroughly.
That was the first thing I was like, how are we going to do this? When they told us that we didn't have to pay a single bill, I was like, wow, they pretty much have saved us.
It's like the world has been lifted off of your shoulders, and now your focus is supporting this child.
There is not another hospital like St. Jude. The patient care is unmatchable. It saved my life. It saved my daughter's life. It saved our family.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures. Saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
It's pretty amazing when you consider that 7 years ago, we didn't have the treatments we have now. We cure 80% of children with cancer. Go back 50 years, we were curing 20 to 30%. This is the miracle story of modern medicine. We understand what makes this cancer tick. And of course, without donors from around the world, this just couldn't happen. And there's one thing we're focused on, and that's beating this thing.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
It is a horrible scenario, but it happens. Dennis writes about his wife. She was diagnosed with leukemia. In fact, she's a 2-time survivor. And in the midst of all that, they ran up over $1 million in medical bills. Thankfully, they're MediShare members. And Dennis says they are so thankful for that, how others came together to meet their needs. And that's how so many MediShare members feel. This is not health insurance. It's different. You don't have to pay for things you don't believe in. And like Dennis found out, it just works. So if you join MediShare, not only do you save a lot of money, the typical family saves about $500 a month, but you know where your money's going each month. You're helping people. And if the time should come, they'll be helping and even praying for you. So yes, it's different. And as more than 400,000 people now know, when it comes to healthcare costs, different is beautiful. Find out more. Call 833-34-BIBLE. That's 833-34-BIBLE. 833-34-BIBLE.
Well, that's going to wrap things up with Ron Seggi today and our very special recognition of the 50th anniversary of the moon landing back on July 20th, 1969. Well, I can remember where I was like it was yesterday. And I want to thank our guests for being part of the show. Our interview that we did several years back and replayed it for the first time in a 28-year history of our show with astronaut Alan Shepard. Also, my friend Jay Barbary from NBC with his book, Live from the Cape. And astronaut Mike Massimino and astronaut Winston Scott. Well, we'll be looking for your company to come next week when we're going to do it again live all across the USA and around the world with Ron Seggi today. Till then, I'm Ron Seggi, hoping you have blue skies and green lights.